Hey, everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast, where you get to learn everything you want to know about addiction and recovery. I'm your host, Angela Pugh, co-founder of Kansas City Recovery, life coach, and recovering alcoholic. To learn more about me, you can listen to episode 0 on your podcast app or find us on the web at addictionunlimited.com. Hey, Dirk, so great to have you here. Thank you for coming on and spending this time with me.
Thanks, Angela. It's an honor to be here.
Why don't we start with just taking a few minutes and tell the audience a little bit about you and what you do?
Okay, well, I do multiple things. I am a book author, I am a sobriety coach, and I am a podcaster. I also happen to be a public relations consultant, but that's not related to the topic here. But I work with people who are either trying to get sober or who are already sober. I myself am sober as well. I've been sober since 2007, and I have dedicated a great deal of my time in recovery to helping others experience the positive, wonderful aspects of sobriety that I've experienced.
Oh, I love all of that. How early in your recovery did you know that you wanted to help others? Like, did you know immediately that you wanted it to be your work, or like, what was your journey in that?
Not that I wanted it to be my work. No, it was. I got sober in the 12-step program, and a big part of that program has an emphasis on helping others, being of service to others. And I took to that pretty quickly, pretty well. After I got my first year of sobriety, I started going out and doing whatever I could to help other people who were struggling with alcoholism and addiction. And I did that in a variety of different ways. So in terms of helping others, I did it as a part of my own recovery. For many years, I worked with other people in the 12-step program. And what happened was, over time, people started coming to me that were outside of the program. Just, as most of us know, if we're in recovery, we will soon discover that a lot of our friends and family members struggle with addiction of some kind. And so people started to come to me in my life, in my personal life, because they were seeing the dramatic and positive changes in my life. And so people started coming to me on a pretty regular basis, friends, family members, and whatnot, asking me questions about recovery. What did you do? What is sobriety like? What has your experience been? How did you get sober? What was your life like as an addict versus your sober life? Et cetera, et cetera. And I would do whatever I could to help anybody I could and still do. And what I found is it was incredibly gratifying to me, and it gave me a sense of purpose. And most importantly, and this is something that's of course emphasized in the 12-step program, it helped me stay sober. It helped my sobriety by helping other people in their recovery. And so over time, I got the idea that I wanted to start writing about my experiences. I had always wanted to be a writer. It is something that I wanted to be since I was about 14 years old, but I put it aside so that I could drink and never got to it. Had some failed attempts, but in my recovery, I decided I wanted to start exploring my own experience in recovery and share it with as many people as I could through books. And so I started writing my first book, and my first book is called The Sober Journey, A Guide to Prayer and Meditation in Recovery, because prayer and meditation is a big part of my recovery. So I wrote this book, and I had one of my friends in recovery, who's a sober friend of mine. She is an editor, and she edited it for me, and we got the book out, and it did really well, and it still does really well. And I found that I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing nonfiction books. I always wanted to be a fiction writer, but I found that I'm better at writing nonfiction books. So I just kept writing books. I went on this spurt of about 2 years, and I ended up writing 5 books on addiction and recovery and what my experience has been like and all the different aspects of recovery. And it was really gratifying. It was really fun, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm still doing it. And along the way, I realized instead of just constantly pursuing a business career, which I also do, I'm also a business person on the side, but I wanted to expand my ability to help others in recovery any way I could. And so I slowly I put out a YouTube channel and started expressing myself through videos. And then I got a little TikTok channel, and I found that the response was really strong. There was a lot of people out there around my age range. I'm in my late 50s, who were thinking about getting sober, because a lot of people that I deal with and work with are people in their 30s and 40s and 50s that want to get sober, because that's kind of the age range that I find that a lot of people want to get sober. And it just seemed like a natural fit. And I started putting out this information, sharing it on social media, as a part of a way to promote my books as well. But somewhere along the way, I realized that what I really want to do is help people who don't necessarily want to get sober in the 12-step program, because it's not for everybody. It works for me, but it doesn't work for everybody. And some people are really reluctant to be in groups. I know I was. I'm a very shy person by nature, and it was really hard for me to get used to being in a group of people, small or large meetings. Now I'm fine with it, and talking in front of people. And so I decided I would go to the next stage of being able to help people. And I went out and became certified as a sobriety coach or a recovery coach, which you're familiar with, of course, and just kind of expanded from there. So I went from writing books to going into social media channels to sobriety coaching. And that's kind of where I find myself now. Now I'm doing a podcast and all that. And, and it's all just part of my sober journey, and my podcast is called Sober Mofos. And I just do my best to help as many people as I can.
Yeah, for sure. It's so important too to outline all of those pieces, because when people are at the very beginning and thinking about getting sober, you're trying to figure out, what is your life going to look like? What is this going to be like? Can I do it? Is it going to be horrible? Is it going to be so hard?
Yeah.
And how will my job be? Because so many people connect drinking to their job, especially like sales and whatever. You have a job that you have to take people out to dinner and things like that. For me, I was a bartender, right? Like,
Right.
it makes you question every piece of your life. And what is this going to be like? The truth is, there's no way that you can sit at day one and imagine what your life is going to be like. Because if I tried to figure out 17 years ago what my sober life was going to look like at 17 years, I couldn't tell you any piece of this. First of all, because podcasts didn't exist, right?
Right.
So I wouldn't have known that. I might have been able to guess the coaching part because I had always been fascinated with coaching, but I never thought it would be my career. Even when I got certified as a life coach, I never thought it would be my career, right? Like, I could have never figured out what my life was going to look like at day one, because you have to just let it unfold. So I love that you just laid out that journey. And it is truly that one step takes you to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. And you have to be open to a certain degree, not trying to control every step, but open to letting the steps present themselves. Like, this is your next thing. Maybe you should try this. Maybe this is the right thing.
Yes.
You can't micromanage and figure out every single piece of your journey in advance.
Right. And I've always found that, I refer to myself as a grateful alcoholic, because discovering I was an alcoholic and all of that entails allowed me to open up my life, because up to that point, my life was very small. It was, I thought I was living at large, living this lifestyle. But by, looking back and once you come out of it, you realize that lifestyle, if you're an active alcoholic or addict like I am and I was, my life was very limited and very small and very restricted to a few things, mostly hangovers and drinking, and whatever fell in between, to earn money and pay the rent was, a side note. My life consisted of focusing on drinking. And once I got sober, it like kind of pulled, I don't know, what's the metaphor I want to use? It kind of pulled the shades from my eyes. It gave me a new perspective on life, that I could see things, the forest for the trees sort of analogy, where I could see that I was living a really small life. And there were so many things I wanted out of this time on earth that I've been given, this limited finite time that I've been given. And I wasn't achieving any of it. And when I got sober, I was 43 years old. And I would, I had good jobs. I drove a nice car and all that. But, it was like, so what? I'm miserable and I'm not happy and I'm lonely and my life is just small. So once I got sober, it just expanded my life so much. But as you said, I had to learn, and this is one of the great sayings that I always emphasize to people is I had to learn to live life on life's terms and do it one step at a time, one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, just to live my life and to learn and to grow and not be so, not to be too impatient and take it as it comes. I always like to say that I had to learn to flow with the river. To flow with, wherever the river was going to take me, I had to go. I'm sure you're familiar with the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with John Candy. Okay, you remember that?
Yeah.
So when I was still drinking, I had a set of movies I used to watch when I was really, really hungover, when I was miserable. And Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is one of those movies. I would sit there and, eat cheeseburgers and watch that movie and just kind of recover my morning hangovers, my daily hangovers. And there's a line in there where John Candy refers to himself as being like a twig on the shoulders of a mighty river. And at the time, it was like when I would listen to it, I was like, okay, that's kind of funny. Once I got sober, I watched that movie again and it took on a whole new meaning for me. And it became this profound thing. And it sounds trite, but it was this profound moment where I'm like, oh, that's kind of the secret that I've been looking for. I've got to be, a twig on the shoulders of a mighty river and just let it take me where it's going to go. Because as an addict or an alcoholic, we have big egos and low self-esteem. We're self-loathing narcissists is what I like to call it. And our mode of operation is to trying to get our hands around the throat of life and strangle it into submission and do it the way we want it to do it. And it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And once I learned that, and it took a long time, it didn't happen overnight. It took a long time for me to absorb it. And I'm still working on it. I still have my moments. But once I learned to just kind of let go, I have my faith that I rely on that helps me, but to let go, let people be the way they want to be, let every outcome, take on its own flavor and move me in the direction it's going to go. And I can just show up and do my best every day, be the best man I can be hardworking, be diligent, be responsible, but understanding that life is not going to work exactly the way I want it to do. And I have to learn one little step at a time, like you were saying, just to expand and to grow and to learn and just become. And all of a sudden, I look back and I've got over 15 years of recovery and my life is dramatically different. I mean, I can't even compare it, from being in alleyways to, smoking crack with gangbangers and homeless people to owning a home and 2 cars and being married and being happy and healthy and going to the gym and having a couple businesses. And, it's just huge. I mean, it's just dramatic. It happened one little step at a time as I learned and grew and let life kind of just take me where it was going to take me.
Yeah, it is. You're exactly right. It's like taking the blinders off when you get sober. When I was drinking, like I had blinders. I had one sole focus and everything kind of revolved. And I was very high functioning also, but everything kind of revolved around drinking. I always say I was either planning it, doing it, or recovering from it. Those were my three phases of life, right? Day to day. That's where I was in one of those 3 stages. But it is like you have blinders and that's all your commitment to your addiction is so powerful. And when you get sober and you can kind of exhale and just take a breath, like those blinders come off and you see there's this entire freaking world that you have not been a part of. And you have the freedom to do so many more things because you're not saddled to this thing that has so much power and control in your life. It's amazing. And I agree with you. I literally have gotten to be 2 entirely different people in one lifetime.
Right.
Like I am unrecognizable today from 20 years ago for sure. I'm 17 years sober, but 20 years ago, I was a very different human being.
Yeah. What's funny too is like when I got sober, I just assumed, I mean, this is so funny to look back at and so naive, but I just assumed that everybody was doing the same thing I was doing, that everybody was obsessed with drinking and, going to a social event required not, because I never just had a glass of wine. I had to have I had to be drunk before I got there, drink when I got there, drink after. But I was just assumed that everybody was drinking the way I was doing, or
Yep, me too.
snorting what I was snorting, or doing whatever I was doing. No, I just assumed it was like crazy. And so when I got sober, it slowly dawned on me. It's like, not everybody's obsessed over drinking. Not everybody's, like you're just saying, planning it and recovering from it. And I would go to restaurants and I would see people with a glass of wine on their table and across, next to me, and it would take them an hour to finish it. And I was just shocked by that. I was like, what is wrong with these people? And it took me, and it slowly dawned on me. It's like, I'm just one of this small, niche of people, this group of people who happens to be an alcoholic, who is obsessed with this thing in a bottle. And it has nothing to do with the liquid itself. It's what's in my mind and in my soul. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's where the
right.
problem resides. But I just thought everybody was obsessed with drinking, and everybody was planning it and preparing for it and recovering for it all the time, like I was. And you get out there and you find out it's like, no, they're really not. Most people are just going about their business, raising their families, going to work, having a nice life.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. And I was the same way, especially being a bartender,
Yeah.
because that was my environment. I mean, I was just surrounded by alcohol all the time and people that drank alcohol all the time. I thought that's what everybody was doing.
Sure.
And I remember, it sounds so crazy now with recent history being what it is, but the first time I heard somebody talk about never having a drink was Donald Trump. And he was in an interview. And I mean, it was probably 20, 25 years ago, and I remember seeing him in this interview, and he said he had never had a drink of alcohol and he had never smoked a cigarette. And I was a smoker for 20 years too. And I remember hearing that and I was shocked.
Yeah.
I was like, there are people that don't drink.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even know that was an option.
Right, exactly. It's just like water or air.
Yes, in my little alcoholic brain, it was just a matter
in your
of
small
survival.
little world. That's true. And we surround ourselves with people that reinforce that too. When we're in our addiction, it's like, I've written about this fairly extensively too, that, when I finally got clean, I was like looking around and I had to let go of, and this scares people a lot, but I had to let go of, the vast majority of my friends and companions, many of whom have not made it out and who've died, but I had to let go of them and just say, and, because my world was so small and it was so contained, it was so focused on drinking and drugging and all that, and that I had to rebuild. It's kind of going back to the small steps. I had to rebuild and gather and start gathering friends again, and over, spending time with people who were not consumed with drinking or trying to recover from their drinking life. And so it was a big change. It was very dramatic to find out that, again, not everybody is obsessed with this, and that there is a world, and quite a positive and healthy world outside of those circles, outside of those social circles, the bar circle and the party circle and the party circuit and all that. And it was a tough transition, but worth it to find out.
Yeah. At the same time, it's not much different than any other life transition, right? Like, I know as I got older and a lot of my friends started getting married and having kids, like, moms tend to want to hang out with other moms, right? So some of those friendships start to shift. Like, when you get out of college, you don't hang out with all of the people that you hung out with in college for the rest of your life. Like, you hang on to a couple of them for sure, but it's just a transition as your life changes and you do different things. Or I would think it's probably the same thing if you have a job for a long time and you have those work friends. When you transition to a new job, those relationships are going to change and be different because you're not working next to them all day, every day. So it isn't unlike other areas of life. And I think people overly stress about this aspect, like, what's going to happen to all my friends? But it's like, really, this is a regular life transition that we go through many, many, many times. And I would say, even as an entrepreneur, like, I have lost friends on that journey too, where because they don't understand my drive or how I live, or they don't see the big picture vision that I see, and can be very negative and discouraging. And I have to let those people go, right? Because I can't have that energy around me. So I do think that those friendship transitions are a little more normal than people make them out to be when they're thinking about getting sober.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the letting go of the lifestyle as we'll call it, the lifestyle, the drinking lifestyle, the partying lifestyle, it's hard because you're letting go of much more than you're transitioning out. You're letting go of much more than just the social interactions or social contacts. It is your for me certainly it's your emotional medicine. It's that thing that gives you strength. You think anyway. It's false, but it's
Right.
what gives you emotional strength, spiritual strength. I mean, it's not an accident that it's called spirits, but it gives you your spiritual strength and all these these things that human beings need. And so if that's all or that's what you've come to rely on is your emotional strength, your spiritual strength, your mental strength from drinking or using, that transition is tough, and I understand it. I get it. I believe it. I was scared to let go of that. It was really frightening. It was like, well,
Yeah.
how am I going to handle this? How am I going to handle life? I don't know how to do it. And because I started drinking when I was 12. So when I got sober, I was like 12 because I hadn't matured.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
I wore clothes, men's clothes, and I paid rent, but emotionally, I had not matured at all. I was a little boy, and it
Yeah.
was scary, and it was scary to come out of that and realize, oh God, I got to rely, not only I got to rely on myself, I got to rely on other people, and I got to trust other people, and that was a real hard thing to do. It's tough. It is a difficult transition, but it can certainly be done. Hell, if I could do it, I don't know if anybody can.
I know, right? That's what I say too. I'm like, you guys, I swear,
Yeah.
if I can get sober and change my life, I promise you,
Yep.
you can,
Yep.
because I was a
Yep.
disaster
Yep. Oh. Oh
in
God.
every way. I was a
Oh
disaster.
man, yeah. I just think about my early recovery of just the amount of crying I did and the amount of just upheaval, emotional upheaval. I just didn't know where to turn. There were times I had this habit. My sponsor told me, like, if you're ever having a freak out, first call me, of course, but if you can't reach me or whatever, he knew I'm a sugar. I love sugar. I love sweets. So my
Yeah.
thing is every night I would, instead of drinking, I would eat a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. That was my thing, or a big bag of donuts. I put on a lot of weight, and they're like, that's fine, whatever. I lost it eventually, but I just had to turn to something. I had to have that fix, just to get
Mhm.
me through the night. And you just got to do whatever you can do to get through it. But those early days, boy, they can be rough. But I guess the analogy is birth. It can be you go through the pain for something that is beautiful in the long run. And sobriety
Yeah.
certainly has been worth it for me. Whatever discomfort I had to go through to make that transition was certainly worth it.
Yeah. And, I have a story that's a little bit different where my beginning was pretty dreamy. Like I had stress because I had a major legal case looming over me my whole
Oh wow.
first year. And I was facing a substantial piece of jail time.
Hmm.
But to be honest with you, I wasn't super stressed about it. Like I was fully in that place of surrender. Like it happened. There's nothing I can do. I can't get out of this. Right. So whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I will take it as it comes. And that's all I can do.
Yeah.
I just wanted to focus on making sure I didn't go back to drinking.
Yeah.
That's all I cared about.
Right. Right.
And it's one of the things I'm so grateful for 12 steps and for not being super freaked out about it because I was so open to go there, right? Of course, back then too, there weren't all the other options that there are now either. It was kind of the only house on the block for getting sober, but I was fine that I had to go there because all I cared about was not drinking. I didn't really care what they were doing in there. As long as I didn't
Yeah.
drink, I was going to show up. And what that did for me is number one, it allowed me to relax and just take all the weight off. I just followed simple directions.
Yeah.
I didn't have to figure anything out.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
have to make any decisions.
Yeah.
I just had to show up and sit down and shut up.
Yep.
And that was all. And really, to be honest with you, that's all I could have pulled off.
Yeah.
If it would
Yeah.
have been, if it would have been any more than that, I probably would have fallen apart. But I also had a built-in new family. And then, eventually made really great friends. So I just didn't have a lot of discomfort early on. I was having a lot of fun. I was super excited. about the prospect of my new life, and probably a little bit addicted to hope at that point because I had no idea what my new life would look like. I just knew it couldn't possibly be as bad as what I just lived
Right.
through, you know?
Yeah.
So I just had all this hope of what it could be. And I was just on board for that. I didn't miss my old life. I wasn't mad about it. I wasn't mad about having to get sober. I was so excited to just move forward and have that freedom because I felt like I had been held prisoner to alcohol for so long,
Mm.
you know, and I just was so grateful to be done with it.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's my experience. Like when I first got sober, I wanted to be away from alcohol and I wanted to be sober so bad because I was in so much pain. I was brought to my knees pretty hard. It was a pretty harsh, um, rock bottom, I guess you call it, whatever. But it was pretty bad. Things got pretty rough, and so I wanted that relief so badly. But one thing I struggled with, and it's something I didn't even know about myself. This is what's so fascinating about recovery. I didn't realize because I always thought I was an outgoing extrovert, and it turns out I'm very introverted and I'm very quiet and I'm
Me
very
too.
shy. And I'm talking on a podcast right now, and that's fine. But I'm doing this just to kind of express myself and hopefully help somebody. But my nature is to be quiet and reserved. I go to social events. If my wife and I go, she knows that I don't say very much. I stay in the back. I'm just kind of quiet, and I will engage in conversation if I think you're interesting. But I had to learn that, holy crap, I'm not extroverted. I'm not the lampshade guy that I always thought I was, and that's what booze kind of created in me, and cocaine is as well. It brought out that Mr. Lampshade, the guy is always on and never shutting up and always, hitting on people and being inappropriate and just basically being a jerk. And what I realized, and then I get sober and I'm going to 12-step meetings and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable. Because I'm shy, I'm uncomfortable. What I realized, and I emphasize to this people all the time, people who are uncomfortable with meetings, is don't worry about it. If you want to, and the old timers will tell you this is the wrong approach. I don't care. Sit in the back,
Sit in the
show
back.
up late, leave early, just sit through the meeting, get through the beginning, the middle, the end. I know the hand holding at the end sucks, for newcomers and stuff, but it's okay. If you're shy, you're getting the information. When you're ready, you'll move to the second next seat up, and then you'll be towards the middle. And as long as you're in the middle of that meeting, eventually you're going to be fine. But it's okay to be uncomfortable, to not be comfortable around people, and to be shy, and to be introverted. That was a huge revelation for me. It's like, oh my God, this explains so much about my life and my discomfort around people, my desire to go to parties, but never being comfortable at parties until I got drunk.
Yeah.
My real shyness around women and dating, that was always a big issue. I really struggled with that. So I basically always ended up in alcoholic relationships because we would just be drunk together. All my relationships were built
Right.
on booze,
Right.
until I met my wife.
Same.
And that's built on sobriety. But it explains so much. And that was that's why in many ways, I think my early recovery for me was so traumatic, I guess, was I don't know, traumatic. I loved it and I wanted to be there. I knew I needed to be there, but it was a difficult transition, those early days for me. And I think a lot of people experience that kind of overwhelming shock of being sober around other human beings. Is like, it's weird. It's very
Yeah.
strange. And I'm still not 100%. I've been sober over 15 years. I'm still not 100% comfortable around people. And I get in crowds and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh God, when can I get out of here? But I do whatever I
I
got to
know.
do.
I say that. I say to my audience all the time, like I'm the queen of like faking a headache
Yeah.
and leaving,
Yeah.
even if it's people that I know and like and enjoy,
Sure.
like my anxiety will kick
Yep.
in. I'm exactly the same, what you said, right? I thought I was an extrovert, but what I realized is I was just drunk.
Yeah.
I was never an
Yeah.
extrovert. I was just drunk,
Yeah.
right? Which allowed me to be more of an extrovert. But yeah, it is, all of those things are challenging. And I had a lot of that anxiety too. I just knew I had to go.
Sure.
I knew I had to stay sober. Like it
Yeah.
was not
Mhm.
optional. And I just forced myself, like I started very small. Like I made myself start making eye contact, because at first I'm walking in, eyes down,
Handshakes.
and so I
Handshakes.
started
Yeah.
just making eye contact. Oh, no, I was not touching anybody.
Ah,
But
ah,
it had to start just with eye contact. And then when I got comfortable with making eye contact, then I graduated to eye contact and a smile. And then I do eye contact, a smile, and hello. And the deal I made with myself is it had to be a different person every single day.
mm.
So I couldn't just get comfortable with one person and go through this. Like it had to be a different person each day. And that's what I did. And I just challenged
You
myself.
know what's interesting? You say that. I remember this so clearly. In 12-step meetings, there's a big emphasis on being of service and taking on like making the coffee or doing some kind of task, setting up the chairs, whatever. And I used to go to this big meeting up on, it was right off La Brea and Sunset in Los Angeles. And it was on Sunday mornings. It was
Mhm.
big. And it was filled with tons of people. Everybody was good looking. There was movie stars and everything. And I was terrified. I'm like, God, I don't belong here. Even amongst a bunch of alcoholics and addicts, I still felt like the outsider, like they're going to be, I felt it was imposter syndrome and all that. And then I was a few months in, probably 6 months in, and somebody freed up the greeter commitment, which is where you stand at the door with a couple other people and you just welcome people and say welcome. And you look for the people who look terrified because they're new, and you shake their hand and you say hi. And it had this massive impact on my recovery. And so for the first time, that was the first time I started feeling comfortable going to meetings because I was the greeter. So
Right.
it was my job to make sure that people felt welcome, and I would have to look at them like you're saying. I had to look them in the eye. I had to shake their hand, or say some stupid joke, whatever, and just, get them inside. And if I saw somebody who looked really scared, that gave me an opportunity to be of service to them and put my arm around them and say,
Right.
hey, sit next to me or whatever it was, and it was just this great experience, and it brought me out of myself, and it started started melting the ice, so to speak, of my tremendous
Yeah.
sense of shyness and introversion in the meetings. And it really had a profound impact on my life and my recovery. It was really interesting.
I re- I remember the first time I walked into my meeting, like obviously super early on. I remember the first time I walked in, and of course, I hadn't spoken to anybody. And I was the typical like show up a couple of minutes late.
Yeah,
So you didn't have to talk to anybody, right? And I never shared, right? I never
of
shared.
course.
Even to this day, I rarely will share, So I was always like, hey, everybody, I'm Angela. I'm an alcoholic. I'm just going to listen today. And I'd be like, thanks, Angela. And it goes on. And I remember the first time I walked in and somebody goes, hey, Angela, good to see you. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
they know my
Yeah. I'm a
name.
rock star. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I felt like a freaking rock star. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, somebody
I had the
remembers
same
me.
exact experience. Yep.
And it was
Yep.
this,
Yep.
it was one of those moments that all that anxiety kind of fell away. And it was the very moment that I started to feel like I belonged,
Yep.
right? That I was okay, that I was in the right place and I was okay.
Yep.
I mean, I had a sense of, from my first meeting at my home group, especially, like I knew these were my people. It was the first place I had ever been in my life that I felt like I was surrounded by my people. Like this was
Yes.
my tribe,
Yes.
I
Yes.
fit here. And so I had that sense from my first meeting, but it took that when that person said hi to me, I was probably only, I don't know, 10, 12 days in, and I was going every single day, but it was that little tiny moment that made all the difference. And so much of that anxiety started to melt away.
Completely relate to that. I had the exact same story. Somebody said my name and hey Dirk, as I walked in, I was like, what? Who is this guy and how does he know
Yeah.
me? I was kind of saying a moment of paranoia, but it made me feel like I belonged. And the best part of
Mhm.
it is when I was able to turn that around and become the guy who said that to somebody else, who saw the
I
newcomer,
was just getting ready to go there.
yeah,
Yes. And that is why it's so important to, like, especially in groups, human nature, people have a tendency to get very judgy. And this is one of the things that I always think about. It's like, why do you want to judge somebody who looks uncomfortable or who is having a hard time
Yeah.
or who is crying, like, why do you want to judge that person? Because you have no idea what they're going through.
Sure.
We've all been there,
Mm.
right? We have all been. When people are walking through those doors, they are literally usually at the worst space in their life.
Yep.
It is the hardest time in your life, right? Something at least semi-tragic has usually happened. You are completely broken. And I'm like, that is your opportunity to be of service and do something to help that person feel more
Yeah,
comfortable.
absolutely. It's
Instead of judging, say a kind word. Or if
yes.
you catch yourself judging, then go call your sponsor and work it out.
Yes.
But, like, have that service mindset. How can I make this better for the next person coming
Right.
in?
And then you can also, what's also fantastic about this type of recovery is then you take it outside of the rooms and you take it into the other parts of
Yes.
your life. It doesn't have to be in recovery. And it's like, it's a big lesson that a lot of us learn because we come into those rooms and we're wounded animals and we're defensive and we're scared. Just like
Yeah.
any animal who's wounded and cornered, it's not going to be nice to you. It's going to bite you. But eventually, if you can build up enough trust and everything, and you can start to feel comfortable, then you can become the person that takes this lesson of kindness and compassion and patience towards others outside. It doesn't have to just be for people who are in
Yeah.
recovery or addiction. You can take it to your grocery store, just to help others.
Yes.
And it can be in the simplest, most, little small moments of life, but you can take that compassion outside and help others. And it changes. And it goes back to what we're talking about, being a grateful alcoholic. It teaches you, whether you get recovery in the 12-step program or anything else, you can learn how to be more compassionate and open to
Mhm.
to others and less judgmental, and take that into all aspects of your life. And that is one of the great things about what we're discussing is the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in the 12-step program. And it's amazing how much we can learn and grow from just recovery alone, and that's just one part of our lives. It
Incredible.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say? I mean, you've been sober a long time. What would you say is the most difficult time you've gone through in your sobriety, and how did you stay sober?
When my father died, he died. So I got sober in my sobriety day is December 9th, 2007. And I had almost exactly 3 years of recovery when he was diagnosed with cancer. And I was close to my dad. We had a difficult, complicated relationship, like most father sons and moms and daughters. It was complicated. But I adored him, and I was very close to him in many ways. And 3 years, almost 3 years to the day, he was diagnosed with cancer. And I said this to people, that I know that God brought me to this moment of recovery so that I could handle this, because this is going to get rough,
Yeah.
and it got rough. So he ended up living for another 3 years, and I spent the last few months of his recovery. I was at the time I was living in Tahoe, and the woman I was dating, who's now my wife, was living in Los Angeles, and my father was in San Francisco. So I was triangulating, and I was driving back and forth
Mhm.
and flying back and forth, mostly driving back and forth to see everybody and be the best I could be to the person I was falling in love with, as well as my father, who was leaving us. And it got to the point where I finally had to move down to his apartment. My brothers and I were taking care of him in shifts, and it got really, really bad, and he began to disintegrate. His cancer was a very aggressive form of bladder cancer, and he was not ready to go. And I took everything that I had learned from Alcoholics Anonymous and my recovery and my sponsor Paul, and I brought it into that room, because he died in his apartment in San Francisco, and we had a bed set up, and I was there by his side pretty much virtually every day. And I was, at the time, my stepmother, she's gone, she's passed away. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's while he was dying of cancer. So she was like a little child,
Wow.
and she couldn't remember anything. And we had to figure this out. My father was in denial, and we had to figure it out and get her, take her to the doctor and find out what was going on with her, and found out. So now my brother, and I'm not taking all the credit myself. My brothers were 100% with me, but we were dealing with somebody with Alzheimer's who we loved and adored dearly, with my father, who was disintegrating in front of our eyes. And she still liked to have her wine, and she liked to have her couple glasses of wine every night. We were a drinking family. And my father, towards the end, had to have morphine. Now, I love booze and I love morphine. I love them both. And so it was a real challenge for me to get through that. And any chance I could get, I was going down to the marina to some meetings down there. And I was like you, I never spoke a lot in meetings. I've been a speaker 1,000 times, but I'm not one of the guys who raises his hands a lot.
Yeah.
But those meetings I was sharing
Yeah.
like crazy. I was really struggling. So between all that, I managed, between the meetings and my constant prayer and my constant reaching out to my faith, I got through it, and working with my family. And there were times when I wanted to drink so badly, and it was like I knew if I could just, once he would fall asleep, and my stepmother would fall asleep in her bedroom, and I was sleeping on the couch. I knew that it would be so easy for me to drink, and no one would ever know. No one would ever know. But, thankfully I was talking to my wife, who's in recovery every day, and I was talking to my sponsor, and I was going to meetings, and I got through it. And, he actually died. I was laying on the couch right next to him when he died. And I'm so grateful that I was there. And it was gruesome. There was nothing peaceful about this death. It was a brutal experience, but I'm glad I was there, and I was sober, and I thank God literally for allowing me to be 100% present for my dad and for my brothers and for my entire family and for myself, just to be there. Because if I had been my old drunk, drugged up self, I wouldn't have showed up most of the time. Or I would have been drunk all night, or I would have been stealing money, or, doing whatever I could. It would have just, huge difference. And I was there, and I was present, and I got to say goodnight to him every night and tell him I love him every single night, and just be there for him, and take care of him as best I could. And my stepmother as well, who we also just lost a couple years ago. But that was the biggest challenge. That was a huge challenge. But through the grace of God, and through the program, and through my sponsor and my wife and whatnot in my meetings, I got through it.
It's so beautiful to be a blessing to your family and not a liability.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Yes, it is.
Because imagine, I was just thinking when you were talking about that, and you said it, if you had been drinking through it, what would that have looked like? Right. And I was just thinking, I would have been 100% a liability. I would have sucked all the air out of the room, with everybody then worrying about me and what am I doing and what's my behavior going to be like, and am I going to be okay? It would have been a whole different set of circumstances. It would have been about me instead of about them.
Yeah. And it's like,
about them.
They've had enough of me. They don't need any more of me.
Right. I am a full-time job.
Right.
Well, Dirk, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation. I love having these incredible recovery conversations with people, and I just really appreciate you being open with your story.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I enjoy it too. It's a fascinating topic, and it never gets old.
Amen to that.
So I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's great.
You've reached the end of another great episode of the Addiction Unlimited podcast. Candid and honest conversation about addiction and recovery. Be sure to visit us at addictionunlimited.com to join the conversation and access show notes and links to everything we talked about. Love this episode? Please take 30 seconds to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes to help us improve and give you the information you want. Thanks for listening. See you next week.